just asking the question once or twice in class, it's able for you to use some of your class time so you're reviewing since I can't review with you. Alright, so for your classwork, you want to copy starting on page 119 through pages 122, the bold terms and definitions. So on pages 119 to page 122, you want to copy the bold terms and definitions 3 times. So as many as you can, as well as you can, in about 10 to 15 minutes is what you want to spend, how long working on it. Now keep in mind, you don't want to focus just on that. You want to go back if you have extra time and try to do some of the other terms or look through the other terms and make sure that you still know them. So go ahead and pause your video and then go ahead and do that. So again, page 119 through page 122, bold terms and definitions 3 times each, just so you can help you focus your time. Just for a little close. Alright, you can go ahead and pause the video, but I'm just going to go ahead and keep going. Alright, so thinking back over it, I'm actually going to go back farther, so that way if you had time to work on some of these, hopefully this will help jog your memory. If not, try to say the term or answer the question before I do, so that way you are going back and reviewing not just the most recent stuff, but the far back stuff we haven't been quizzed or tested over. Alright, who was the last French monarch before the French Revolution? Louis XVI, good job. Alright, what was the old French fort that was stormed at the start of the French Revolution? The Bastille. What do we call that whole period whenever France was going through anarchy because it didn't have that biblical foundation? The Reign of Terror, good job. What is it called whenever the British take the American sailors and force them into the British Navy? Impressment, that's it. Alright, who was sent to negotiate a treaty with Great Britain during this time period, trying to keep us out of conflict? John Jay. Now what do we call that treaty that was between us and Great Britain, so that way it was to keep us out of the war out of the conflict that was happening in Europe and keep us from going to war with Great Britain? The Jay Treaty. Good job. Alright, who was sent to Spain then to negotiate with Spain? Thomas Pinckney. What do we call that treaty that between us and Spain that also settled the boundary of Spanish West Florida? The Pinckney Treaty. Alright, who won the Battle of Fallen Timbers against the Native Americans? Anthony Wayne. Good. What were the 3 states that were added during this time period? Good job. Kentucky, Tennessee, and Vermont. Alright, what was George Washington's last speech to the nation? Official speech. Farewell address. What were the 3 things he warned about in the farewell address? He warned against divisive sectionalism, party strife, and entangling alliances with foreign nations. Alright, so what was the weird thing about the election of 1796? You note for this one, you want to note the year for it. So it's the election of 1796. Right, we had 2 different candidates from 2 different parties become president and vice president. Who was president? Adams. Who was vice president? Thomas Jefferson. Good job. Alright, what do we call the event whenever we send over our ambassadors to France to try to negotiate with France, to try to keep us out of conflict with France, but France wouldn't even meet with us, and they said they would only meet with us with a large bribe as opposed to, and with other things were also included. Good, the XYZ affair said that they might be willing to negotiate if certain demands were met and a payment of a large bribe, so that's the XYZ affair. Alright, there were 4 acts passed this time period. 3 of them were against foreigners living in the United States, and one of them was against the Republican newspapers. Which one made it a crime to publish false, scandalous, or malicious statements against the government? This is the one that was aimed specifically at the Republican newspapers. The Sedition Act. Good job. What was the act that increased the time you had to live in the United States before you become a United States citizen? The Naturalization Act. What was the act that authorized the president to order out of the country aliens he believed to be dangerous to public peace, suspected of treason or conspiracy? Alien Friends Act. And what was the one that said during a time of war, if you're subject to a foreign power, you need to go home? That's the Alien Enemies Act. Make a note for those 4. Alright, so we saw it with these 4 acts being passed. We saw several states were rising up to say, could they choose to decide which acts of Congress that they would follow and which acts that they wouldn't? Alright, who wrote to the Virginia legislature condemning it? James Madison. Who wrote to the Kentucky legislature condemning these acts? Thomas Jefferson. So make sure that you note them. Alright, the election of 1800. So again, 1800, the year. What's weird about it? right? We had a tie between the electoral votes, so it got thrown into the House of Representatives so they could choose. Alright, who ended up winning this election? Thomas Jefferson, and then Aaron Burr was the vice president. What was the amendment that was passed this time period? What's the number amendment that said, okay, you're going to vote for one electoral vote for president, one electoral vote for vice president, because we're tired of having weird situations like this? 12th Amendment. Good job. Alright, what was the Judiciary Act that called for the creation of 16 new federal judgeships? And because these were filled at the last second, they're referred to as the midnight judges or the midnight appointments. What do we call that Judiciary Act? So the Judiciary Act of, you gotta know the year of it because there's multiple Judiciary Acts. 1801. So 1801. Make a note for that. Alright. Let's see. So the age of Jefferson. Who was Jefferson's Secretary of State? James Madison. Who was his Secretary of the Treasury? Albert Gallatin. Make a note for him. Let's see. Did they end up getting rid of the National Bank? No, even though it wasn't their idea, Thomas Jefferson and his Republicans said, okay, it works, so we'll let it stick around. Alright, who was the Supreme Court Justice during this time period? John Marshall. Good. Now, what was that court case that established judicial review, or the first time we had the Supreme Court declare something unconstitutional? Here it is important. Who's first, who's second? Marbury versus Madison. So, William Marbury is suing James Madison, saying, give me my appointment to be a judge. Alright, what was the military academy that was established on the west bank of the Hudson River in New York? That's West Point. Alright, who was the minister that was sent over to France originally? So, someone else gets sent over to come help him. But this guy is partly responsible for the Louisiana Purchase. Robert R. Livingston. So Robert Livingston, who was sent over to Livingston with the authorization saying, hey, we can spend $2 million, but we can go up to $10 million if we need to get New Orleans and then part of Florida. James Monroe, make a note for him, he's going to be showing up in future chapters. Alright, how much did we end up paying for the Louisiana Purchase? This is an approximate number. 15 million. Good. Alright, now, was buying the Louisiana Purchase, buying the Louisiana Territory, the Louisiana Purchase, was that a strict construction of the Constitution or a loose construction of the Constitution? Loose construction, because nowhere did it say in there that the federal government had the authority to buy land. And Thomas Jefferson knew that and understood that, but he understood it's technically not written, and I feel personally that it should only be strict construction, but I can't wait, and I'm sure future generations will understand. Alright, what is the year for the Louisiana Purchase? What's the date you need to know? 1808. Good job. Alright, who explored the northern territory of the Louisiana Purchase? There was two gentlemen that were kind of in charge of it. Meriwether Lewis and William Clark. So, make a note for those two people. They explored the northern portion. What was the name for the Shoshone woman that ended up traveling with them and her husband? But who was the name for that woman? Sacagawea. Good job. What do we call the landform to where the rivers on one side of it will flow towards the Atlantic, while the rivers on the other side will flow towards the Pacific? What do we call that dividing point? A Great Divide. Good job. Alright, we haven't quite talked about him yet, but he was a bold term on page 122. So, who was the guy that explored the southern portion of the Louisiana Purchase? Zebulon Pike. Good job. Alright, so hopefully you knew all those things as we went over them, so I'll help you on your study, because tomorrow is Friday, so make sure you are prepared and that you are ready to go. Alright, go ahead and take out your textbook if you don't have so already. Turn over to page 122. Now, we started talking about Lewis and Clark yesterday, so now we're getting into the Louisiana Purchase, the southern portion. So Lewis and Clark, they went up north. It took them about 2 years, all said and done, before they made it back to St. Louis. So St. Louis on September 23rd, 1806. So we talked about how they kept journals, just saying, here's all the different things we saw and we discovered. Another one that was sent was Zebulon Pike. So while Lewis and Clark explored for the northern half, Zebulon Clark, he explored the southern portion for it. So permanent President Johnson, he commissioned Zebulon Pike to explore the southern half of Louisiana. His Louisiana expedition gets cut short because he does discover Pike's Peak, so that's cool and that's interesting for it. So he discovered what becomes known as Pike's Peak, a really tall section of the Rockies in Colorado. So it's named after him. Unfortunately, he got lost though, so he started wandering around in this section by accident, and he wandered too far down into the Spanish-controlled area. Well, the Spanish didn't want the Americans wandering into it, so they arrested him and they took him to jail to basically figure out, who are you, what are you doing over here, why are you wandering around in our territory? So they were arrested. Now, several months later, they were released, so it's not like he stayed there and died. He got released later on, but the Spanish basically just arrested him just to see, what are you doing? Why are you here? What's going on? But they let them go home later. So his expedition was cut short. Just so you know, though, Zebulon Pike, he explored the southern portion, and he discovered Pike's Peak about right here, but his expedition was cut short because he got lost. So we know Zebulon Pike. Alright, other events during Thomas Jefferson's presidency. One of the major ones was with Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr. So, you might know some of this already, but Jefferson's second administration, because Thomas Jefferson was elected twice. Remember, the first time, you have the disputed electoral votes between him and Aaron Burr. So, Thomas Jefferson becomes president, Aaron Burr becomes vice president. He runs again, Thomas Jefferson for president. So, did he run again? He run again for president. Now, the Republican candidate was Charles C. Pinckney. We've already talked about him. So, Charles C. Pinckney, and he defeats Charles C. Pinckney because so many people like Thomas Jefferson. Now, during his second administration, though, it didn't go as well for it. During Jefferson's first administration, or first term, Aaron Burr, he made some unwise political decisions. Now remember, Aaron Burr was already the vice president underneath the Republicans, but he decided he would switch parties and run for a Federalist candidate for the governor of New York. So while he's currently the Republican vice president, he's going to switch parties and run as a governor for New York. Now, it wasn't necessarily a problem that he ran for governor, but because he was switching parties, people understood, what do you believe then? If you're going to jump from being a Republican candidate to being a Federalist candidate just so that way you can be a governor, this doesn't look good. This doesn't seem good. And so that was the main reason why people became suspicious of him, just because he was switching parties, and that was the main thing with it. Now, Alexander Hamilton did not like Aaron Burr. Now, remember, Alexander Hamilton was already a Federalist, so he didn't like Aaron Burr switching parties, and so he used his influence within his party. Since Aaron Burr was running as a Federalist candidate, Aaron Burr used his influence against him to say, don't vote for that candidate. Well, Burr decided that it was Hamilton's fault that he lost the governorship, so he and Alexander dueled. Now, keep in mind, that was something that they did back in this time period, to have a gentleman's duel. Technically, it was illegal. You weren't supposed to, but everyone knew this was like a gentleman's thing that gentlemen did, and you weren't really supposed to kill the other person. It was like a formal agreement that you could shoot each other, but you're just saying, we disagreed on this so much, we're going to go out, and we could kill each other, but we won't. We're both going to aim up at the clouds or at the sky, so that way we don't actually shoot the other person. It was more of a symbolic display, saying my honor is so offended by what you did, or I'm in such a disagreement at what you did, that we're going to have this formal show of demonstration of, I could shoot you for it, but I choose not to. So that was what was happening in this era. That was just what they did, to where you weren't really supposed to kill the other person. Aaron Burr ended up actually killing Alexander Hamilton. Now, because of that, people were horrified by it. Now, he wasn't tried as a murderer, just because that was the culture of the day, where you could do it, and you could shoot someone in a duel, but you weren't really supposed to. It was really frowned upon, and you would be branded as a murderer, even though you didn't actually end up going to jail or being tried by a jury. So people didn't like Aaron Burr after this, because they knew, oh, you actually shot Hamilton. You weren't supposed to, but you did. And so people didn't like him after this. So not only did he switch parties, he also shot Alexander Hamilton. And so because of that, both groups, neither one of them liked him at this point. So politically, financially ruined, he becomes involved in something else, so known as the Burr Conspiracy. Your book points out that we're not sure exactly what he planned to do. There are a couple of different documents about it, but it looks like he wanted to create an empire with himself as like the ruler of it, and it would be the land from Mexico and Louisiana Territory. The capital would be New Orleans, and Burr would be the leader of it. He had several other people on his side to do this, to go take over the Louisiana Purchase territory, basically. So it would be the area of Mexico and the Louisiana Territory, basically establish a new country in that section for it. One of his co-conspirators was General James Wilkinson, the governor of the Louisiana Purchase territory. He later on decides, you know, I don't think I want to do this after all. I changed my mind. I'm going to go and report and tell people what Aaron Burr is doing. I changed my mind. I don't want to be involved in this. So because of that, Burr gets arrested and he gets tried by John Marshall. Now remember, John Marshall, he is the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. So once Wilkinson portrayed him to the authorities, this is whenever it goes officially to trial. Aaron Burr technically hadn't attacked the United States. He was just getting ready to. And so because of that, he basically said, okay, well, you didn't actually do anything yet, so we're not going to charge you with treason because you didn't actually do anything, but it's just highly suspicious all around. And so because of that, he wasn't tried for treason. After the trial, he goes to Europe and lives in Europe for a while. He tries to convince some people to help fund basically a war to create his empire in the New World. But Europe doesn't want to get involved either, because remember, Napoleon and the Napoleonic Wars are going on in Europe, so they don't want to fund it or help out that. So he comes back to the United States, and he practiced law, just went back to being a lawyer until he died. So it's one of those, Aaron Burr is a really kind of interesting person. Now, you might know a lot of him from maybe a movie or something, but that's part of the reason as to why, is what we talk about, because he had a very colorful history, and he got involved in a bunch of things, probably a lot of unwise decisions based on what he did, but something to where it is an interesting person in history. Alright, just make a note. So Aaron Burr, make a note that he killed Alexander Hamilton. He was involved in the Burr conspiracy. He ended up going to Europe and trying to convince Europe to support another conquest, but he ended up just coming back to New York and just being a lawyer, and that was it. Alright, so just make a note for that. Alright, so the Barbary Pirates is the next major event that kind of happened with Thomas Jefferson's second administration. So he was having trouble with the Barbary Pirates. Remember, this is over in Africa, if you remember from world history, or if you remember from geography, that this is the Atlantic Ocean, Spain, Portugal. So geography people should remember this is the Iberian Peninsula, Italian Peninsula, the Balkan Peninsula. You have Africa down here. This is the Strait of Gibraltar, Egypt. So this is the section of Africa. Now, the Barbary Pirates, these are named for the Berbers, so the pronunciation changes slightly. So the Berbers were the people group that lived there. So the Berbers, that was the people that lived in these Barbary states, or these sections of Africa. So these are the different Barbary states that were in Africa at this time period. These are pirates sanctioned by the Muslim nations, since Africa is predominantly Muslim in this section. Now, typically we don't think of Muslim for Africa, but keep in mind, this is the time period, if you remember with Queen Isabel and King Ferdinand of Spain, how they pushed back the Moors with Christopher Columbus. That's the reason why they couldn't fund him right away. That's because the Muslims were going from Egypt off across the northern portion of Africa, trying to come across into Europe. This way, Queen Isabel and King Ferdinand pushed them back, so they're kind of still on this section though. So this is northern Africa, not southern Africa. So northern Africa, you have those Muslim nations. So these pirates were sanctioned by the Muslim nations to waylay European American ships. They would steal their cargo and they would hold their crews for ransom, for money. Now, this had been going on since America started. So George Washington and John Adams, both of them had paid this yearly tribute to the Barbary Pirates because they didn't want the Americans to be taken hostage and held for ransom and to have their crews waylaid. So they said, we will pay you a tribute or a bribe to leave our ships alone. Now keep in mind, what was the major idea with Washington and Adams' administration in regards to other nations? Right, they want to stay out of war and stay out of conflict. So even though paying tribute to these Barbary Pirates, we would say that's really sad and I would hate doing that. Oh, they didn't like it either. But they understood It's easier to pay the tribute and to not have our people hurt or held for ransom and to not lose our cargoes. We'll just pay the yearly tribute and just keep out of conflict with them. That's simpler at the time. So Washington and John Adams, they just paid it just so that way the pirates would leave us alone. Now, whenever the ruler of Tripoli tried to raise the yearly tribute, this is whenever Thomas Jefferson decided that he could no longer stomach it. Thomas Jefferson, as the president, didn't like it. He hated it, and he understood at the time, I'll pay it. I don't like it, but I'll pay it. But once Tripoli raised the yearly tribute, raised the price, he said, nope, that's it. I'm not doing it anymore. We need to do something about them. We need to have a war and force them to stop. This is specifically against Tripoli, not the other Barbary states, so it's just Tripoli in particular. So once Tripoli tried to increase the yearly tribute, Jefferson never refused to concede. He declared war. Well, technically Tripoli declared war on us first, but we went to war with them. Alright, so Jefferson, he sent a small squadron of warships into the area. So Tripoli is the name of the country. We call this, well, Barbary state, we call this whole war the Tripolitan. So the pronunciation gets slightly different. So it's not Tripolitan, it's how it looks. Tripolitan, like you're saying Neapolitan, Tripolitan. So that's how you pronounce this war. So, Tripolitan War, the best known leader of it, the best known hero was Stephen Decatur, not Stephen, so be careful. Stephen Decatur, make a note of him. He snuck into the Tripolitan harbor and he burned an American warship that the pirates of Tripoli, that the people had captured. So after the American warships had bombarded the coast of Tripoli made peace with the United States. So we still had to pay tribute to the other Barbary states though, but just Tripoli we had defended ourselves against. Alright, I think that's it for it. So just make a note though that we did it because we still had to pay tribute, but it was just against Tripoli was the only Barbary state that we went to war against. So that's how come this is known as the Tripolitan War, and Stephen Decatur was most well-known hero of the Tripolitan War. Alright, moving on from it. So Great Britain and France we are still having trouble with, and we're still having issues trying to keep out of war with France and England because Napoleon is still around in France, and so there's a lot of conflict over there. So Napoleon issued the Berlin Decree. This prohibited trade through the Allies of France with England. So because of that, Napoleon's saying, okay, if you are an ally of France, you can't trade with England. We are going to, we're about to go to war with them. They were already blocking each other's ports because of the rivalry between these two countries. So he's saying, okay, you can't trade with England if you call yourself an ally of France. Well, Britain responded with the Orders in Council. This prohibited neutral ships from entering any of Napoleon's ports without first entering our port to be inspected and pay fees. So England took it a step farther, or Great Britain as their name is, took it a step farther and was saying, okay, not just allies, a neutral ship. You can't go to France unless you stop at our harbors first. Well, Napoleon said, oh, well, if they say neutral ships, I say neutral ships too. So he issued the Milan Decree. This extended the effects of the Berlin Doctrine to neutral nations, saying, okay, now it's just neutral countries. You can't go over into England. So both countries are saying you can't go to France and you can't go to England, so both countries are at each other, and so American ships are caught in the crossfires. Because if we try to go to France, England will stop us. If we try to go to England, France will stop us. So both countries are interfering with American shipping. This actually kind of helps out with American shipping though, because the price of our goods starts to go up and up and up. Since France and Britain both wanted to trade with us, that it increased the prices of our goods so much that even if just 1/3 of our ships made it to the destination, we would make so much money to where we would be making a profit from it. So that's the reason why American shippers kept sending goods over to England and France, was because they knew, okay, even if 1/3 of my ships just makes it, I lose 2/3 to where they get captured, I'm still going to make money and I'm still going to make profit. So this increases the American value of, well, it increases the value of the American shipping. This is one of the reasons why Thomas Jefferson thinks he can try to negotiate with trading with France and England later on, was because he knew that they needed American shipments, and he basically overestimated how badly that they needed them. Your book points out, though, that because we were sending so many ships to France or to England, a lot of our ships were seized. Since England had more ships, though, than France did, they could enforce their rules more than France could. That's how come England ended up catching more of our ships than France. One of the major issues, though, we had with England was the impressment of American seamen. The impressment of American seamen. Alright, now remember, what does impressment mean? No, good. It remembers that the British are basically taking what they thought were British deserters and then bringing them back into the British Navy. Now, they weren't always careful to grab just deserters. They would claim whoever they thought was a British deserter. You are a British deserter. You are coming back with us to serve in the Navy. So a lot of our American sailors were forced to serve the King of Great Britain, whether or not they actually wanted to. So they're basically kidnapping the American sailors. So that was a major issue with us against Great Britain. We didn't like this. We didn't want this to happen. And so that was one of the major complaints in this time period. One of the other major complaints was the Chesapeake Affair. So look over on page 124. So you have two warships, the Leopard and the Chesapeake. Now this is closer to our waters. This is just off the coast of Virginia. So this is in our territory. The Leopard was the British warship and the Chesapeake was our warship. So these aren't merchant ships. These are warships. Well, the Leopard went up to the Chesapeake and told them, we want to search for deserters. The Chesapeake commander said, no, we're a warship. We're not merchants. We don't have any British deserters. We're all American citizens. You can't come on. Well, the Leopard fired into the Chesapeake without any warning whatsoever. It just opened fire on us. Now, the book didn't really talk about this a whole lot, but apparently they fired twice point blank into our sides like that. And so because of that, we were not prepared at all for any type of conflict. You weren't supposed to do that. Just come up, pretend to be friendly, and then shoot us. You're not supposed to do that. So your book points out that they took off four of our people. Only one of them actually turned out to even be British, but they took 4 of them. We had 3 dead and 18 wounded. Of those 18, one of them ended up dying later. And the Chesapeake had to go back home because she had been attacked. So because of this whole event, just the sneakiness of it and what had happened, this outraged the American people. So they said, okay, not only did you attack a ship without warning, this is a warship. This is a ship that's part of our Navy, and you just attacked one of our warships. It was a direct insult to the American Navy. So that's part of the reason why the American people wanted war. Unfortunately, Thomas Jefferson was trying so hard to cut American spending that he realized, we're not prepared to go to war. The Navy and the military has been decreased so much and defunded so much to where he understood, if we try to declare war, we're going to lose. We're not ready to go to war. So because of that, we weren't ready to go to war, and that's what Thomas Jefferson knew, and he tried to stay out of this as much as possible. So your book points out, as part of Jefferson's program to reduce government spending, Congress had reduced the size of the Army and Navy to such an extent America was totally unprepared to defend itself against a major power. We see this fixed a little bit with the War of 1812 later on. That's the reason why Thomas Jefferson did not declare war right now with it. Thomas Jefferson thinks because American merchants and because America's goods are in such high demand in England and France that maybe he can try to threaten them to get them to work with us without using military force. He'll try to use money instead. So it's because he convinces Congress to adopt the Embargo Act. This prohibited American exports. So just saying Americans cannot trade with a foreign European power. So he decided, okay, if we don't trade with anybody, England's going to need it so bad they'll have to work with us. France will need it so bad that they'll have to work with us. And so this will keep us out of conflict, but it'll make England and France be nicer to us and start working with us. That way we don't keep losing ships. He overestimated how long it would take for Great Britain and France to realize the effects of this, because they could still trade with other nations over in Europe. They just weren't trading with the Americans. Our economy, though, was so dependent on foreign trade by this point that shutting off all trade hurt the American economy so bad. We were used to trading with Europe and trading in particular with France and England. So since we could no longer trade with anybody, there was no more market for our goods. Your book points out that many investors and merchants went bankrupt, dock workers, seamen, shipbuilders were out of work, farmers lost the market for their crops, so it was basically causing the American economy to collapse and it was causing a lot of people to lose their money and lose their income because they can no longer trade with another foreign power. Your book points out that the people who were against the Embargo Act, and particularly in the New England area. Remember, that's the main New York and that northern section for it. So they were very much against it because that's what most of them did. Remember, in the southern colonies, they had more agriculture. Now, they couldn't sell their agriculture to England, but they had agriculture and they had food. In the northern colonies, it was more industry and shipbuilding. So because of that, they were directly affected. Your book points out many subverted the embargo by smuggling, which is never good whenever your people feel like that they're not going to obey the law and they're going to go around the law. Many juries, and they refused to indicate violers, the juries would not say that the people were guilty, they wouldn't find them guilty of it. In the Northeast, there were even threats of succession. Now, typically we talk about succession or people pulling out of the Union with the southern colonies, but these northern colonies were already talking about it because they were directly affected by this Embargo Act. They were saying, you know what, if the federal government wants to say we can't trade with other nations, maybe we don't want to be part of the federal government. Maybe we should go ahead and just declare ourselves as our own state. And so we hear about this more with the Civil War, but even the northern states are talking about it in this particular area because they were directly affected. So they hated it so much that they decided, no, we want to get out of it, and we want to go ahead and get out of it in this section. Now, nothing ever comes of it, but there were threats of succession talking about should we pull out as a state and be our own separate country since the Union, the federal government, is trying to force this on us. Alright, so your book points out finally in Jefferson's last week of office, the Embargo Act gets repealed or null and void just because they realize this isn't working. We need to not make this a law anymore. Alright, so really quick, move on just a little bit from it. So, James Madison, he becomes president next. Now, Thomas Jefferson, he lets it be known that he wants James Madison to be the next president. Now remember, James Madison was what to Thomas Jefferson? He was Thomas Jefferson's what? Secretary of State. You're going to see this trend that in a lot of cases, the president and the president, whoever his Secretary of State is, typically becomes president. You're going to notice this kind of trend over and over and over again. It doesn't mean it always happens that way, but you'll notice that it happens oddly enough. Not the vice president, but it's the president and then the Secretary of State. A lot of cases becomes the next president. Not all the time, but it happens a couple times in United States history. So, Thomas Jefferson, he could have run for a third term if he wanted to, because remember that was still legal in this time period. But Thomas Jefferson was tired of politics, and he said the same thing that George Washington did. Oh, I'm tired and I want to go home. So he said, vote for James Madison. I like James Madison. He was a good Secretary of State. He'll be a good president. He's a good Democratic Republican. Vote for him. And so, Republicans, they chose Thomas Jefferson's chosen successor, James Madison. They chose him as their candidate. The Republicans, they chose Charles Pinckney again. Charles Pinckney still lost though. So, sorry, Charles Pinckney, you lost twice. So, make it up for those that Madison, he was well qualified to be a president, because remember, what is he also known for? He's the father of the what? Father of the Constitution. So, James Madison had done several things by this point in history in order to establish himself as a good, knowledgeable person of our government and how our government is supposed to run. Now, your book points out Madison, he was a small, frail man. A lot of cases, his nickname was Little Jimmy. Jimmy can be short for James. So they would nickname him Little Jimmy just because he was kind of a smaller, frailer individual, but he was a good leader. And with the War of 1812, he was a good, strong leader in that regard. Alright, we're going to go ahead and we'll stop there because I want to give you time since you had classwork, but make sure you're studying because tomorrow is Friday, so you should know what that means. Alright, so read pages 125 up through page, alright, 129. So 125 up through 129. Answer questions 1 through 6 on page 131. Answer questions 1 through 6 on page 131. Alright, don't forget though that the final draft of your paper is due not Monday. Well, no, it is due this Monday. It's due this coming Monday, October 5th. So don't forget to work on your Federalist paper essay. Make sure that you're getting that fixed and that you're getting that adjusted. Alright, so for the heading, I think I mentioned yesterday that I just want Federalist essay as just the heading, so that's fine for it. So just Federalist essay as your heading or your title for your paper. I wanted to make sure that was clear. There's a little bit of unclearness